My name is Sarah. I'm 32 years old, and 3 months ago, my sister thought she destroyed my life in front of our entire family. Instead, she handed me the perfect opportunity to reveal a secret I'd been keeping for 5 years, one that would change everything between us forever. Picture this. Your sister stands up at her own engagement party, taps her champagne glass, and announces to a room full of relatives that your marriage just fell apart. The gasps, the stares, the pity in everyone's eyes as they turn to look at you. But here's the thing she didn't know. I'd just signed the papers to acquire her fiancé's struggling company for $12 million. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been the one they underestimate while lifting someone else up, then you'll understand exactly why what happened next felt like the sweetest justice I've ever experienced. But before I tell you about that moment, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this all unfolded. Because what started as the most humiliating night of my life became the moment I finally stopped hiding who I really was. Growing up, my sister Rebecca was everything I wasn't, at least according to our parents. She was the cheerleader, the homecoming queen, the one who married her college sweetheart right after graduation in a fairy tale wedding that cost more than most people's cars. I was the quiet one, the bookworm, the daughter who chose a practical career in accounting, while Rebecca pursued her dreams of becoming an interior designer. Sarah's always been so responsible, my mother would say, and somehow she made responsible sound like a consolation prize. Rebecca has such vision, such creativity. She's going to do something really special with her life. I graduated summa cum laude with my accounting degree, but at the family dinner celebrating my achievement, the conversation somehow shifted to Rebecca's latest design project within 10 minutes. I passed my CPA exam on the first try, something only about 50% of candidates manage, but the celebration dinner was postponed because Rebecca had gotten a lead on designing a boutique hotel lobby. Don't get me wrong, I love my sister. But watching your parents' eyes light up whenever she walked into a room while barely acknowledging your presence teaches you something important about your place in the family hierarchy. It teaches you to stop expecting recognition and start creating your own validation. That's exactly what I did, starting the day I graduated college. While Rebecca was planning her wedding and establishing her design business, I was working 16-hour days at Hartwell & Associates, one of the most prestigious accounting firms in Chicago. While she was posting Instagram photos of her perfectly decorated new apartment, I was studying for my CPA exam and taking on every challenging client the partners would give me. But here's what nobody in my family knew. I wasn't just working for Hartwell & Associates. I was learning from them. Every corporate restructuring, every merger and acquisition, every financial analysis that crossed my desk was teaching me how businesses really work, how money really moves, and most importantly, how deals really get made. My marriage to David had been comfortable, predictable, safe. We'd met in college, both accounting majors, both planning stable, conventional lives. For 7 years, we'd lived in a modest suburban house, drove reliable cars, and saved money for a retirement that seemed decades away. David was a good man, kind, steady, completely content with our quiet life together. But I wasn't content. Every day, I watched companies rise and fall based on decisions made in boardrooms, and I started to understand that I didn't want to just analyze those decisions. I wanted to make them. While David was satisfied with his position at a small local firm, I was dreaming bigger, much bigger. The problem was, nobody in my family would have believed those dreams were anything more than fantasy. So I kept them to myself and started building something in secret. It started small. too small for anyone to notice or care about, which was exactly how I wanted it. During my 3rd year at Hartwell & Associates, I'd saved enough money to make my first real estate investment, a small duplex in an up-and-coming neighborhood on Chicago's Northwest Side. Nothing glamorous, nothing that would make headlines at family dinners, just a solid investment property that generated modest rental income. David knew about the duplex, of course. As my husband, he had to sign the mortgage documents. But what he didn't fully grasp was that this wasn't just about extra income, it was about building capital for bigger moves. "It's a good investment," he'd said, approving but unexcited. "Very practical, very you. Very me." Even my husband saw me as the practical one, the safe choice, the person who colored inside the lines, and I let him think that because it made everything else so much easier. Within 18 months, the duplex had appreciated enough that I could leverage the equity for my next purchase, a small commercial building housing 3 retail tenants. The cash flow was better, the appreciation potential was higher, and suddenly I was starting to understand something that would change everything. I had a talent for seeing value where others saw risk. While Rebecca was posting photos of herself at charity galas and design exhibitions, I was spending my evenings analyzing market trends, studying zoning changes, and identifying properties that were about to become much more valuable than their current owners realized. While my family was discussing Rebecca's latest design contract over Sunday dinner, I was quietly building a portfolio that was growing faster than anyone would have believed possible. The beauty of real estate investment is that it's largely invisible to people who aren't paying attention. Your family sees you living in the same modest house, driving the same practical car, working the same accounting job. They have no idea that you're accumulating assets, building equity, positioning yourself for opportunities that most people never even know exist. By year 5, I owned 6 properties generating significant monthly cash flow. But more importantly, I'd caught the attention of some major players in Chicago's commercial real estate market. When you consistently identify undervalued properties and turn them into profitable investments, people notice. The right people. That's when Marcus Chen reached out to me. Marcus was a partner at Chen & Associates, one of Chicago's most successful private equity firms specializing in commercial real estate and business acquisitions. He'd been watching my investment pattern and wanted to meet. Not to offer me a job, but to offer me something much more interesting. A partnership opportunity that would change everything. "You have an eye for this," he told me over coffee at a downtown hotel that probably cost more per night than most people make in a week. "But you're thinking too small. With the right backing, the right opportunities, you could be making deals that matter. Real deals." Real deals. The phrase made my pulse quicken in a way that calculating tax returns never had. Marcus was offering me the chance to join a small, exclusive group of investors who pooled resources to acquire underperforming businesses, optimize their operations, and either sell them for significant profits or keep them as long-term cash-generating assets. The minimum buy-in was $2 million. Money I didn't have yet, but money I could access by leveraging my real estate portfolio. David thought I was crazy when I told him about the opportunity. "Sarah, we have a good life," he said, genuine concern in his voice. "Why risk everything on something so speculative? You've built a nice little real estate portfolio, you have a secure job, isn't that enough?" But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. Not when I could see exactly how much bigger my life could become if I was willing to take calculated risks that others were too afraid to even consider. "What if it doesn't work out?" David asked. "What if we lose everything?" "What if it does work out?" I countered. "What if in 5 years, we're not worried about mortgage payments or retirement planning because we've created real wealth?" He couldn't see it. David was a good man, but he couldn't see past the comfortable, predictable life we'd built together. And that's when I realized something that would eventually end our marriage. We'd grown into completely different people who wanted completely different futures. I joined Marcus's investment group using every dollar of equity I could extract from my real estate portfolio, plus a loan against my 401k that made my conservative husband physically uncomfortable. For the first 6 months, I wondered if David had been right to worry. We were evaluating potential acquisitions, conducting due diligence, building relationships with business brokers and industry contacts, but we weren't making any moves yet. Then Marcus called me on a Tuesday morning in March with news that would change everything. "We found our first target," he said. "Small manufacturing company, family-owned for 3 generations, current owner is ready to retire, but doesn't trust his son to run the business. Revenue of $8 million annually, but operating at about 60% efficiency due to outdated systems and processes. We can acquire it for $4.2 million, invest another $1 million in upgrades and optimization, and conservatively project $12 million in annual revenue within 18 months. My share of the deal would be $600,000, more money than I'd ever spent on anything except my house. But the projected return made my pulse race. If Marcus was right, my investment would more than double within 2 years, and I'd own a piece of a thriving business that generated substantial ongoing income. David was terrified. "Sarah, this is our entire life savings plus money we don't even have yet. If this fails, we'll figure something out," I interrupted. "But David, if this works, we'll never have to worry about money again. We'll have real wealth, real options, real freedom." He couldn't understand why anyone would trade security for possibility. I couldn't understand why anyone would choose limitations over potential. The manufacturing deal was everything Marcus had promised, and more. Within 8 months, we'd streamlined operations, upgraded equipment, landed 2 major new contracts, and increased revenue by 47%. When we sold the company 18 months later for $11.8 million, my share of the profit was just over $2 million. Suddenly, I wasn't just a real estate investor playing with modest amounts of capital. I was a serious player in the private equity world, with both the resources and the track record to pursue much bigger opportunities. Over the next 3 years, our investment group acquired and optimized 6 businesses: a chain of medical supply stores, a software company serving niche industrial clients, a logistics firm with underutilized warehouse space, a specialty food distributor, a small hotel chain, and a consulting firm with incredible expertise but terrible marketing. Each deal taught me something new about how businesses actually work, how value gets created, and how the right combination of capital and strategic thinking can transform struggling companies into thriving enterprises. But more importantly, each deal made me wealthier than I'd ever imagined possible. By the time I turned 31, my personal net worth had grown to just over $15 million. I owned significant stakes in multiple profitable businesses, maintained a real estate portfolio worth several $1 million, and had enough liquid capital to pursue opportunities that most people could only dream about. But here's the thing that might surprise you. I was still living in the same modest suburban house, driving the same practical car, working the same accounting job at Hartwell & Associates. From the outside, my life looked exactly the same as it had 5 years earlier. Only David knew about the money, and David was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the person I was becoming. "You've changed," he told me one evening after I'd spent 2 hours on a conference call discussing a potential acquisition while he watched TV alone. "You used to be happy with what we had. Now it's like nothing is ever enough." He was right. I had changed. Success had revealed parts of my personality that I'd never known existed: ambition, confidence, an appetite for risk that grew stronger with each successful deal. The quiet, practical accountant who'd married David 7 years earlier was still there. But she was no longer the dominant part of who I was becoming. And my family? They had no idea. As far as they knew, I was still just Sarah the accountant. Still married to David the local CPA, still living our quiet, predictable life, while Rebecca continued to shine as the family's golden child. Rebecca's interior design business was doing well. She'd built a solid reputation and was earning a comfortable six-figure income designing spaces for Chicago's affluent families. Our parents were incredibly proud of her success, constantly sharing updates about her latest projects and praising her entrepreneurial spirit. Rebecca's company billed over $400,000 last year, my mother announced at our family Christmas gathering. Can you believe that? Our little girl built something so successful? I smiled and congratulated Rebecca, genuinely happy for her achievements, while calculating that my share of profits from our most recent business sale had been more than 4 times her annual revenue. But I didn't say anything. I'd gotten used to being invisible, and invisibility had become my greatest strategic advantage. Nobody expects the quiet one to be building an empire. Nobody watches your moves when they assume you're not making any moves worth watching. And nobody sees you coming when they're too busy looking at someone else. That invisibility was about to become incredibly useful. The first sign that my marriage was in serious trouble came during a dinner conversation about vacation plans. David wanted to spend a week at a modest beach resort in North Carolina, the same place we'd gone for our anniversary the previous year. I suggested we consider something more ambitious, maybe Europe or a luxury resort in the Caribbean. Sarah, that kind of trip would cost us $10,000, David said, looking at me like I'd suggested we buy a yacht. We can't afford to spend that kind of money on a vacation. But we could afford it. We could afford it 10 times over without making a dent in my investment returns from the previous quarter. The problem was that David still thought in terms of our old life, our old limitations, our old dreams. He had no concept of how dramatically our financial situation had changed because he'd chosen not to engage with the business side of what I was building. I think we can afford to splurge a little, I said carefully, not wanting to reveal exactly how much we could afford. Splurge? David laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sarah, you're talking about spending more on one vacation than most people make in 3 months. That's not splurging, that's being irresponsible. Irresponsible. The word stung because it revealed how little David understood about the calculated risks I'd been taking to build our wealth. Every investment decision I'd made had been based on careful analysis, market research, and strategic planning. There was nothing irresponsible about any of it, except maybe not being more transparent with my husband about what I was accomplishing. That's when I realized we'd reached an impasse that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with vision. David was content with a comfortable, predictable life within carefully defined boundaries. I wanted to explore what was possible when you removed those boundaries entirely. The divorce conversation started 6 months later, initiated by David after I'd spent 3 consecutive weekends traveling to evaluate potential acquisitions instead of attending social events with his friends. I don't recognize you anymore, he said, and I could hear genuine sadness in his voice. You used to be happy staying home on weekends, happy with simple pleasures, happy with us. Now you're always working on some deal, always planning the next investment, always focused on making more money we don't even need. We don't need it yet, I replied. But having it gives us options we've never had before. Financial freedom, real security, the ability to do whatever we want without worrying about mortgage payments or retirement savings. But what if what I want is the life we already have? David asked. What if I don't want those options? What if I just want my wife back? It was a fair question, and I didn't have a good answer. The truth was that the person David had married, the practical, cautious accountant who was satisfied with modest goals and predictable outcomes, wasn't entirely gone, but she was no longer the person driving my decisions. I'd discovered parts of myself that had been dormant for years, and now that they were awake, I couldn't pretend they didn't exist. We tried counseling. We tried compromises. We tried taking a break from new investments to focus on our relationship. But the fundamental disconnect remained. David wanted to preserve what we had, and I wanted to explore what we could become. The divorce was amicable, civilized, and heartbreaking. David was a good man who deserved a partner who shared his vision of happiness. I was a woman who'd discovered ambitions that couldn't be contained within the boundaries of our comfortable suburban life. We agreed to keep the financial details private during the divorce proceedings. David received half of our traditional marital assets, the house, our regular savings and retirement accounts, the original real estate investments we'd made together. But the business investments I'd made through Marcus's group remained entirely mine, both because they predated some of our major joint purchases and because David genuinely didn't want any part of what he saw as excessively risky ventures. "I hope it makes you happy," he said when we signed the final papers. "I hope all of this, the money, the deals, the success, I hope it gives you whatever you're looking for." I hoped so too, but I was about to discover that success without people to share it with felt more complicated than I'd expected. Rebecca's engagement to James Morrison was announced at our family's annual 4th of July barbecue, with all the fanfare you'd expect from someone who'd never learned the difference between celebrating good news and performing good news. She orchestrated the announcement like a theatrical production, gathering everyone around the patio, making a speech about finding her soulmate, then revealing the engagement ring with a flourish that made our cousins gasp and our aunts cry. James seemed like a decent enough guy. He was 34, reasonably attractive, and owned a small tech company that provided software solutions for local businesses. Rebecca had been dating him for 18 months, and our parents clearly approved of his steady income and conventional ambitions. "He's so perfect for her," my mother gushed during the ring-admiring session that followed the announcement. "Successful, stable, ready to settle down and start a family. And his business is doing so well. Rebecca said he's hoping to expand into the suburbs next year." I congratulated Rebecca and James with genuine warmth, genuinely happy that my sister had found someone who made her smile the way James obviously did. But I also couldn't help noticing that James's business success, which seemed to impress my family so much, was exactly the kind of modest, local achievement that they'd never bothered to acknowledge when it came to my own career. The engagement party was scheduled for early October at the country club where our parents had been members for decades. Rebecca spent weeks planning every detail, determined to create an event that would be both elegant and memorable. She hired a photographer, arranged for elaborate floral displays, and coordinated a menu that showcased seasonal ingredients prepared by the club's executive chef. Meanwhile, my own life was undergoing dramatic changes that nobody in my family knew about. The divorce from David had been finalized in August, and I'd used my newfound freedom to pursue an opportunity that Marcus had been discussing for months: the acquisition of a struggling tech company that served the same market as James's business. The company was called Digital Solutions Midwest, and it was exactly the kind of business that looked like a disaster from the outside, but represented incredible opportunity to someone who knew how to read financial statements properly. DSM had been founded 8 years earlier by 2 software engineers who were brilliant at creating products but terrible at running a business. They developed excellent software, but had no idea how to market it effectively, price it competitively, or scale their operations efficiently. The company was hemorrhaging money despite having products that were superior to most of their competitors. They were 3 months behind on their lease payments, owed significant money to several vendors, and were facing the possibility of bankruptcy before the end of the year. But here's what Marcus and I saw that others missed. DSM's client retention rate was 97%. Their software had capabilities that their competitors couldn't match, and their main problem wasn't product quality. It was business management. With the right leadership, better marketing, and sufficient capital to weather the transition period, DSM could easily capture a much larger share of their market. The acquisition price was incredibly reasonable, $4.8 million for a company that could potentially generate $15 to $20 million in annual revenue with proper management. My share of the investment was $2.4 million, representing exactly half ownership of what could become a very valuable business. But here's the detail that made this acquisition particularly interesting. DSM's primary market was small to medium-sized businesses in the Chicago metropolitan area, the exact same market that James Morrison's company was serving. Only DSM's products were more sophisticated, and their development team was significantly more experienced. I'd done extensive research on James's company as part of our due diligence process, not because I was specifically targeting him, but because any serious competitor analysis required understanding every player in the market. Morrison Tech Solutions was profitable but limited, annual revenue of approximately $2 million, 12 employees, solid relationships with about 40 local clients. James had built a respectable small business, but he lacked the resources to compete with a properly funded and expertly managed company like DSM was about to become. Once we optimized DSM's operations and launched an effective marketing campaign, companies like Morrison Tech Solutions would face a choice: adapt quickly or get left behind. The acquisition was finalized on September 23rd, exactly 2 weeks before Rebecca's engagement party. Suddenly, I was the majority owner of a company that could potentially dominate the market that James Morrison considered his territory. But I kept that information to myself. The same invisibility that had allowed me to build wealth quietly for 5 years was now concealing what might become a very awkward family situation. If James's business thrived in the new competitive environment, everyone would benefit. But if Morrison Tech Solutions couldn't compete with a better-funded, more sophisticated operation, Rebecca's fiancé was going to face some very difficult decisions about his company's future. Either way, I was about to find out whether my family's respect was reserved exclusively for other people's success stories. The engagement party was everything Rebecca had dreamed it would be: elegant, well-attended, and perfectly orchestrated to showcase her happiness and success. The country club's main dining room had been transformed into something from a design magazine, with sophisticated lighting, stunning floral arrangements, and table settings that probably cost more than most people spend on their entire wedding reception. I arrived alone, which prompted the inevitable questions from relatives who hadn't seen me since the Christmas gathering where I'd still been married to David. "Where's David tonight?" my Aunt Carol asked, scanning the room as if he might be hiding behind a floral arrangement. "We're divorced," I said simply, not wanting to elaborate, but knowing the news would spread through our extended family within minutes. Carol's expression shifted through several phases: surprise, concern, and what looked like pity. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I had no idea things were difficult between you two." "They weren't difficult," I explained. "We just wanted different things from life. It was very amicable." But Carol was already looking past me, clearly more interested in sharing the news than understanding the situation. Within 15 minutes, I'd had similar conversations with 3 other relatives, each expressing surprise that my perfect marriage had ended so quietly. The irony wasn't lost on me. My family had always seen David and me as the stable, predictable couple, the ones who'd found modest happiness and would live modestly ever after. Rebecca was the one with the exciting life, the glamorous career, the fairy tale romance worthy of celebration. Nobody bothered to ask how I was doing after the divorce, whether I was okay financially, or what my plans were for the future. The assumption seemed to be that I'd lost something valuable and would need time to recover from the disappointment. If they only knew. I spent the cocktail hour making polite conversation with family members I saw twice a year, listening to updates about their jobs, their children, their vacation plans. My cousin Michelle had gotten a promotion to marketing manager at her company and was clearly proud of her new salary. $68,000, which she mentioned several times. My Uncle Robert had started a small consulting business that was doing pretty well, with monthly revenue that sometimes reached $8,000. These were good people with legitimate achievements, and I was genuinely happy for their success. But listening to them discuss financial milestones that represented about 3 days of investment income for me was surreal. It reinforced just how invisible my real life had become to the people who supposedly knew me best. James gave a brief speech during dinner, thanking everyone for celebrating with them and talking about how excited he was to start building a life with Rebecca. He mentioned his business plans for expansion, his hopes for growing Morrison Tech Solutions into a regional leader, his confidence that the local market had plenty of room for innovative companies like his. "The future looks incredibly bright," he said, raising his champagne glass. "For our relationship, for our careers, and for our dreams of building something lasting together." Everyone applauded, and I found myself wondering how he'd feel about the future when he realized that his primary competitor had just been acquired by someone with the resources and experience to transform the entire market. But the moment that changed everything came during Rebecca's speech. She'd been holding court all evening, graciously accepting congratulations and showing off her engagement ring to anyone who hadn't yet admired it properly. When she stood to address the room, she looked radiant, confident, completely in her element as the center of attention. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began, her voice carrying easily across the room. "Having family and friends celebrate with us means everything to James and me." She talked about meeting James, about recognizing him as her person, about feeling grateful for the life they were building together. It was a lovely speech, heartfelt and genuine, and I was happy for her obvious joy. Then she paused, her expression shifting to something that looked like concern mixed with sisterly affection. "I also want to acknowledge that this is a time of transition for our family in other ways," Rebecca continued, and I felt my stomach tighten as I realized where this was going. "My sister Sarah has been going through a difficult time lately with her divorce, and I know how hard it must be to celebrate other people's happiness when your own life feels uncertain." The room went completely quiet. 60 people suddenly focused their attention on me, their expressions ranging from sympathetic to curious to awkwardly uncomfortable. "Sarah, I want you to know that James and I are here for you," Rebecca said, looking directly at me with what I'm sure she thought was loving support. "Whatever you need during this challenging period, whether it's help finding a new apartment or just someone to talk to about starting over, you're not alone." Starting over. Help finding an apartment. The words hit me like physical blows, not because they were cruel. Rebecca genuinely thought she was being supportive, but because they revealed how completely my family misunderstood my situation. They saw a divorced woman in her 30s who would need help rebuilding her life from scratch. They had no idea they were looking at someone who'd built more wealth in 5 years than most of them would accumulate in their entire careers. The applause that followed Rebecca's speech was polite but subdued, the kind of response you give when someone says something well-intentioned but deeply awkward. I could feel people avoiding eye contact with me, unsure how to react to being made involuntary witnesses to what felt like a public announcement of my personal failure. That's when something inside me snapped. Not anger, exactly, not hurt, though there was certainly some of that. What I felt was a sudden crystalline clarity about the choice I was facing. I could continue being invisible, continue letting my family underestimate me, continue allowing their assumptions to define how they saw me, or I could finally show them who I really was. I stood up. The room went even quieter, if that was possible. 60 pairs of eyes focused on me with the kind of intense attention usually reserved for accidents or arguments. "Thank you, Rebecca," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I appreciate your concern and your offer of support, but I should probably clarify something about my situation." Rebecca smiled encouragingly, clearly expecting me to express gratitude for her public display of sisterly solidarity. "The divorce was actually my choice," I continued. "David and I wanted different things from life, and I decided to pursue opportunities that required more risk than he was comfortable with." I paused, looking around the room at faces that were beginning to show curiosity rather than just sympathy. As for needing help finding a new apartment, I should mention that I recently purchased a penthouse in River North. 3,200 square feet, floor-to-ceiling windows, panoramic views of the lake and the city skyline. It's quite beautiful, actually. The silence was now absolute. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. I also wanted to congratulate James on his business success and his optimism about the future of Morrison Tech Solutions. It's always inspiring to meet entrepreneurs who are passionate about their work. James was smiling politely, but I could see confusion in his eyes. He had no idea why I was bringing up his company. In fact, I'm excited about the technology sector in Chicago myself. Just a few weeks ago, I finalized the acquisition of Digital Solutions Midwest. Perhaps you know them, James. They're in the same market as your company, though they serve larger clients with more sophisticated software needs. James's smile faltered slightly. Of course he knew DSM. They were his biggest competitor, the company he'd been worried about for months as they'd struggled with financial problems. "We're planning some significant upgrades to their operations," I continued conversationally. "Better marketing, expanded development team, competitive pricing for mid-market clients who need more advanced solutions than most small providers can offer. We think there's tremendous growth potential in that space." Now, James looked genuinely concerned. If DSM was being acquired and upgraded by someone with significant capital, Morrison Tech Solutions was about to face competition unlike anything he'd experienced before. "Sarah," my father said, his voice carrying a warning tone, "this might not be the appropriate time." "You're absolutely right," I interrupted gently. "Rebecca's engagement party should be about celebrating her happiness, not discussing business matters. I just wanted to address the concerns about my needing help during this difficult time." I looked around the room one more time, seeing faces that reflected confusion, shock, and dawning realization that something fundamental had just shifted. I should also mention that DSM was just one of 6 companies in my current portfolio. The others include a manufacturing firm in Wisconsin, a medical supply chain, a boutique hotel group, and a logistics company with operations in 4 states. We've been quite successful with identifying undervalued businesses and optimizing their performance. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. "But you're right, Rebecca. Tonight should be about celebrating your engagement and your future together. So let's raise our glasses to James and Rebecca. May their business endeavors be as successful as their relationship promises to be." I lifted my champagne glass, and after a moment of stunned hesitation, the rest of the room followed suit. But the atmosphere had changed completely. What had started as a celebration of Rebecca's happiness had become something else entirely, a revelation that redefined everything my family thought they knew about me. James looked like he wanted to ask me several very specific questions about DSM's plans for market expansion. Rebecca looked like she was trying to process information that didn't fit with her understanding of reality. My parents looked like they'd just discovered that their practical daughter had been living a secret life for years. And me? I felt like I could finally breathe properly for the first time in months. The rest of the engagement party passed in a blur of whispered conversations and carefully polite interactions that couldn't quite hide the undercurrent of shock and confusion my announcement had created. People who'd been treating me with sympathetic concern suddenly weren't sure how to approach me. Was I the divorced woman who needed support, or was I the business owner who just revealed significant wealth and success? The cognitive dissonance was visible on their faces. James cornered me during the dessert course, his expression a mixture of professional curiosity and personal concern. "Sarah, I had no idea about your business interests," he said, keeping his voice low enough that Rebecca, who was busy accepting congratulations from other guests, couldn't hear. "When you mentioned DSM, I have to admit that caught my attention. They've been struggling financially for months." "They were struggling," I corrected. "Past tense. We completed the acquisition 2 weeks ago, and we're implementing a comprehensive restructuring plan that should have them operating profitably within 6 months. James nodded slowly, processing the implications. "And the market expansion you mentioned?" "We'll be targeting mid-market clients who need more sophisticated solutions than most small providers can offer," I said, repeating what I'd told the room earlier. "Companies with 50 to 200 employees, annual revenues between 5 and 50 million, complex operational needs that require customized software solutions," which was exactly the market segment that James had been trying to break into for the past 2 years without success. Morrison Tech Solutions had the expertise to serve larger clients, but they lacked the resources to compete effectively against more established players. "I see," James said quietly. "And you think there's room in that market for multiple providers?" It was a fair question, and I gave him an honest answer. I think there's room for providers who can deliver exceptional value to their clients. The companies that succeed will be the ones that combine technical expertise with superior customer service and competitive pricing. The ones that don't. I let the sentence hang unfinished. James was smart enough to understand what I wasn't saying directly. "Right," he said. "Well, congratulations on the acquisition. I'm sure you'll do very well with it." But I could see the wheels turning in his head. James was trying to figure out whether the woman who was about to become his sister-in-law represented a business opportunity or a competitive threat. Given the resources I'd just revealed, he was probably concluding it was both. Rebecca appeared at James's side, slipping her arm through his and smiling brightly. "What are you two talking about so seriously?" she asked. "This is supposed to be a party." "Just business stuff," James said, managing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sarah was telling me about her new company." "Oh, that," Rebecca said, waving her hand dismissively. "Sarah's always been so good with numbers and investments. I'm sure whatever she's doing will work out well." The casual dismissal was so characteristic of how my family had always treated my achievements that I almost laughed. Even after learning that I owned multiple businesses and had just acquired her fiancé's primary competitor, Rebecca still couldn't quite take my success seriously. But James understood the significance of what he'd just learned, even if Rebecca didn't. I could see him making mental calculations about market share, client acquisition costs, competitive advantages, and timeline pressures. Morrison Tech Solutions was profitable, but not dominant. If a well-funded competitor started aggressively pursuing the same clients James was targeting, his company's growth plans could be derailed completely. My parents approached as Rebecca and James excused themselves to greet other guests. "Sarah, we need to talk," my father said, his voice carrying the same tone he'd used when I was 16 and had borrowed the car without permission. "Of course," I replied. "What would you like to discuss?" "This business situation you mentioned," my mother said, glancing around to make sure we wouldn't be overheard. "How long has this been going on? Why didn't you tell us you were involved with all these companies?" I've been building the portfolio for 5 years, I said simply. It started small and grew over time. David knew about the investments, but we agreed to keep the details private. 5 years? My father repeated. Sarah, you're talking about millions of dollars in business assets. This isn't something you keep private from your family? But it was exactly something you keep private when your family has spent decades treating your achievements as footnotes to someone else's success story. When every conversation about your career gets redirected to your sister's latest project within 10 minutes. When your parents' eyes light up for Rebecca's 6-figure design business, but glaze over whenever you mention your own work. I kept it private because it was easier, I said honestly. Building wealth requires focus and patience, and I didn't want to deal with questions or opinions or advice from people who didn't understand what I was trying to accomplish. But we're your family, my mother said, sounding hurt. We would have supported you, celebrated your success. Would you? I interrupted gently. Because when I graduated summa cum laude, the celebration dinner got postponed for Rebecca's design project. When I passed my CPA exam, we spent the entire family dinner discussing Rebecca's latest client. When I bought my first investment property, nobody asked about it again after the initial conversation. My parents looked uncomfortable, probably because they were starting to recognize the pattern I was describing. That's different, my father said. Those were smaller achievements, building blocks toward something bigger. If we'd known you were building something this significant, you would have what? I asked. Taken it more seriously? Paid more attention? Asked follow-up questions? The silence that followed was answer enough. Look, I'm not angry about any of this, I continued, which was mostly true. Rebecca deserved the attention she got. Her design business is impressive. Her success is legitimate, and I'm genuinely happy for her achievements. But I stopped expecting equal recognition years ago, and that actually made it easier to focus on building wealth without external pressure or expectations. My parents exchanged a look that suggested they were beginning to understand how their different treatment of their daughters might have influenced my decision to keep my business success private. What happens now? My mother asked. With James's company, I mean. Are you going to be competing directly with him? It was a perceptive question, and one I'd been considering myself. That depends on how James responds to the new competitive environment, I said. Digital Solutions Midwest will be targeting larger clients than Morrison Tech Solutions currently serves, but there will inevitably be some overlap. If James wants to collaborate rather than compete, there might be opportunities for both companies to benefit. What I didn't say was that Morrison Tech Solutions was about to face a choice: evolve quickly or risk being left behind by better-funded competitors. James was smart enough to recognize that reality, and hopefully smart enough to adapt his business strategy accordingly. But that conversation would need to happen between James and me, without family dynamics complicating the business relationship. As the evening wound down and guests began leaving, I found myself wondering whether I'd done the right thing by revealing so much about my business interests. Part of me felt relieved to finally drop the pretense of being the struggling divorced sister who needed help finding an apartment. But another part of me wondered whether I'd just complicated family relationships in ways that would be difficult to repair. Rebecca hugged me goodbye with the same warm affection she'd always shown, seemingly unaware that anything fundamental had changed between us. Thank you for being here tonight, she said. And Sarah, I'm sorry if what I said earlier was awkward. I was just trying to be supportive. I know, I replied, meaning it. You were trying to help, and I appreciate that. I probably should have been more open about my situation earlier. But as I drove home to my penthouse apartment, the one my family hadn't known existed until 3 hours earlier, I realized that the evening had marked a turning point I couldn't reverse. For better or worse, I was no longer invisible to my family. Now, I had to figure out what kind of relationship we'd have when they finally saw me clearly. The morning after Rebecca's engagement party, I woke up to 17 text messages, 4 voicemails, and 3 emails from various family members who apparently needed time to process what they'd learned the night before. The general theme seemed to be a combination of shock, curiosity, and what felt like retroactive concern about not having known about my business success earlier. My cousin Michelle's text was typical. "Sarah, I can't believe you've been building this whole business empire without telling anyone. We need to get together so you can tell me everything about how you did it." My uncle Robert left a voicemail asking whether I might be interested in investing in his consulting business, which he was looking to expand significantly with the right financial backing. My Aunt Carol sent an email with the subject line, "So proud of you," followed by 3 paragraphs about how she'd always known I was capable of great things, despite never having expressed that confidence during any of our previous conversations. But the most interesting message came from James, sent at 7:30 in the morning with the subject line, "Business Conversation." "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly, but I'd like to discuss the competitive landscape we talked about last night. I've been thinking about what you said regarding DSM's market positioning, and I wonder if we might find some mutually beneficial approaches to serving clients in this space. Would you be available for coffee sometime this week?" Professional, diplomatic, and smart, James understood that his company's future might depend on how well he navigated the new reality of having a well-funded competitor, who also happened to be marrying his sister-in-law. I responded to James first, agreeing to meet on Thursday morning at a downtown coffee shop that would allow us to have a private conversation without family complications. Then I sent polite but brief responses to the other messages, thanking people for their interest, but not committing to any detailed discussions about my business activities. The truth was, I needed time to process what had happened the night before and decide how I wanted to handle my family's sudden interest in my success. Wednesday evening, Rebecca called. "Sarah, I've been thinking about what you said at the party," she began, her voice carrying a tone I'd rarely heard from her, uncertainty mixed with what might have been respect. "What specifically?" I asked, genuinely curious about which part of my revelation had surprised her most. "All of it, really. The penthouse, the companies, the fact that you've been building this whole business portfolio while we all thought you were just working your regular accounting job and living your quiet life with David." "I was doing both," I said. "The accounting job provided steady income and taught me about business operations. The quiet life with David gave me the stability to take calculated risks with investments. Everything was connected." "But why didn't you tell us?" Rebecca asked, and for the first time in our adult relationship, she sounded like she was asking the question because she genuinely wanted to understand, rather than because she felt obligated to show interest. I considered giving her a diplomatic answer, something that would spare her feelings and avoid dredging up years of family dynamics that couldn't be changed. But Rebecca deserved honesty, especially if we were going to have a different kind of relationship going forward. "Because you never asked," I said simply. And when I tried to share smaller achievements, they got overlooked or redirected to conversations about your career. After a while, I realized it was easier to build wealth quietly than to compete for attention I was never going to get anyway. Silence on the other end of the line. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice was softer. "Sarah, I never meant to make you feel like your achievements didn't matter." "I know you didn't," I replied. "And I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty. You've worked hard for your success, and you deserve recognition for what you've built. But I stopped looking for validation from the family years ago, and that actually made it easier to focus on creating wealth without worrying about external opinions. "Is that why you and David divorced?" Rebecca asked. "Because you were changing and he couldn't see it?" It was a perceptive question, one that showed Rebecca was thinking more deeply about the situation than I'd given her credit for. "Partly," I admitted. David fell in love with the practical, cautious accountant who was satisfied with modest goals and predictable outcomes. But building wealth revealed parts of my personality I didn't know existed: ambition, risk tolerance, confidence in my ability to create opportunities rather than just respond to them. We grew into different people who wanted different futures. And now? Now I'm figuring out what I want my life to look like when I'm not trying to fit into other people's expectations, I said. I have more financial freedom than I ever imagined possible, but I'm still learning how to use that freedom in ways that actually make me happy. "What about James's company?" Rebecca asked, addressing the elephant in the room. "Are you going to put him out of business?" I laughed, partly because the question was so direct, and partly because it revealed that Rebecca understood the competitive implications better than I'd expected. "That's up to James," I said. "Digital Solutions Midwest will be a stronger competitor than Morrison Tech Solutions has faced before, but there's still room in the market for companies that deliver exceptional value to their clients. If James adapts his strategy, he could actually benefit from having a major player elevate the overall sophistication of the market. But if he doesn't adapt, then he'll face the same challenges that any business faces when the competitive environment changes," I said. I didn't acquire DSM to target James specifically, but I also can't run a business based on family considerations rather than market opportunities. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "This is all so different from how I thought our lives were going," she said finally. 6 months ago, I was the successful entrepreneur sister, and you were the stable, married accountant. Now you're the wealthy business owner, and I don't know what I am in comparison." "You're exactly who you've always been," I said firmly. "Rebecca, your success doesn't become less valuable because I've also been successful. Your design business is impressive, your talent is real, and your achievements are legitimate. The only thing that's changed is that now you know I've been building wealth too." "But your wealth is so much bigger than mine," she said, and I could hear genuine amazement in her voice. "Different kinds of success require different strategies," I replied. "You built a business based on your creativity and design skills. I built wealth by identifying undervalued assets and optimizing their performance. Neither approach is better than the other. They're just different paths to financial independence." We talked for another 20 minutes, covering everything from investment strategies to relationship dynamics, to Rebecca's concerns about how James would handle the competitive pressure. By the end of the conversation, I felt like I was talking to a different version of my sister, one who was finally seeing me as a peer, rather than as the practical sidekick to her more glamorous life. It was a conversation we probably should have had years earlier, but I was grateful we were having it now. Thursday morning's coffee meeting with James took place at a small cafe in the Loop, far enough from both of our usual routines to ensure privacy. James arrived precisely on time, looking professional but slightly nervous, the expression of someone who understands that an important conversation could significantly impact their future. "Thank you for meeting with me," he said as we settled into a corner table with our coffee. "I'll be honest, I've been thinking about our conversation at the party all week." "I imagine you have?" I replied. "Learning that your fiancé's sister just acquired your primary competitor probably wasn't the news you were expecting at your engagement party." James managed a rueful smile. "That's one way to put it. Sarah, I need to ask directly. Is Digital Solutions Midwest planning to target Morrison Tech Solutions client base specifically?" It was a fair question, and he deserved a straightforward answer. DSM will be targeting mid-market clients who need sophisticated software solutions, I said. Some of those prospects are probably companies that Morrison Tech Solutions has been trying to reach as well. But our primary focus will be on businesses that are currently underserved by existing providers, companies that need more advanced capabilities than most small firms can offer, but don't want to pay enterprise-level prices for simple solutions. James nodded, clearly trying to assess where that left his company's growth strategy. Here's what I'll tell you directly, I continued. I didn't acquire DSM to compete with you personally. I acquired it because it was an undervalued business with excellent products and significant growth potential. The fact that it competes in your market is a secondary consideration. But it does compete in my market, James said. Yes, it does. And with proper funding and management, DSM will be a formidable competitor for any company serving the Chicago area technology market. I paused, studying James's expression. He was processing the information calmly, professionally, without the defensive anger or panic that some business owners might have shown in his situation. However, I continued, I'm not interested in destroying existing businesses for the sake of market domination. I'm interested in optimizing DSM's performance and maximizing returns on my investment. If that can be accomplished through collaboration rather than pure competition, I'm open to exploring those possibilities. James leaned forward slightly. What kind of collaboration? Several possibilities, I said. DSM has excellent software development capabilities, but limited sales and marketing resources. Morrison Tech Solutions has strong client relationships and local market knowledge. There might be opportunities for partnership arrangements that benefit both companies. Such as? Referral agreements for clients whose needs don't match your respective specialties. Joint proposals for larger projects that require combined expertise. Possibly even strategic alliance arrangements that allow both companies to pursue opportunities neither could handle independently. James was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. And if I'm not interested in collaboration? He asked. Then you'll compete in a market that's about to become significantly more challenging, I said simply. James, I'm not trying to threaten you or force you into a partnership. I'm offering you information about the competitive landscape and potential alternatives to pure competition. How you respond is entirely your choice. He sipped his coffee, thinking. Can I ask you something personal? James said finally. Sure. Why didn't Rebecca know about your business success? I mean, she talks about you often, and she clearly loves you. But she had no idea you were building wealth like this. It was an insightful question, one that suggested James understood family dynamics better than I'd initially realized. Because my family has never taken my achievements as seriously as they take Rebecca's, I said honestly. When you grow up being the practical, responsible one while someone else gets recognized as the creative, ambitious one, you learn to stop looking for external validation and start creating your own measures of success. That must have been frustrating. It was, for a while, but it also gave me the freedom to build wealth without external pressure or expectations. Nobody was watching my moves, questioning my decisions, or offering unsolicited advice about my investment strategy. That invisibility became a strategic advantage. James nodded slowly. And now? Now I'm figuring out how to have authentic relationships with people who finally see me clearly, I said, including family members who are still adjusting to the fact that their assumptions about me were completely wrong. For what it's worth, James said, Rebecca talks about you with genuine affection and respect. She may not have understood the scope of your business success, but she's always described you as incredibly intelligent and capable. That's good to know, I said, meaning it. Rebecca and I had a long conversation the other night, and I think we're both learning how to relate to each other as adults rather than as the roles we played when we were younger. We spent another 30 minutes discussing potential collaboration opportunities between DSM and Morrison Tech Solutions. James was smart, strategic, and refreshingly honest about his company's strengths and limitations. By the end of the conversation, I was genuinely impressed with his business acumen and his ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. "I'd like to propose something," I said as we prepared to leave. "Give me 2 weeks to complete DSM's operational restructuring and get a clearer picture of our market positioning. Then let's meet again to discuss specific partnership opportunities that might benefit both companies." "I'd appreciate that," James said. "And Sarah, thank you for being direct about the competitive situation. I'd rather know exactly what I'm dealing with than guess about it." "You're welcome. And James? For what it's worth, I think you'll adapt well to the new competitive environment. You're asking the right questions and thinking strategically about your options. That's exactly what successful business owners do when market conditions change." As we shook hands and parted ways, I found myself hoping that James would indeed adapt successfully. Not just because he was marrying my sister, but because he'd shown exactly the kind of professionalism and strategic thinking that I respected in business relationships. Rebecca deserved a partner who could thrive in challenging situations rather than just comfortable ones. Based on our conversation, James might well be that kind of person. 2 weeks after the coffee meeting with James, I was sitting in my penthouse office reviewing DSM's restructuring progress when my phone rang. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen, which wasn't unusual, but her tone when I answered was different from our recent conversations. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about something, and I'm not sure how to bring it up gracefully," she said without preamble. "Just say it directly," I replied, saving the financial report I'd been analyzing. "We're past the point of dancing around difficult topics." "It's about Mom and Dad, and the way they've been treating you since the engagement party." I hadn't spoken to our parents since that night, though I'd received several messages from them that I'd chosen not to return immediately. I'd needed time to process the evening's revelations and decide how I wanted to handle my family's sudden interest in my business success. "What about them?" I asked. "They've been calling me constantly, asking questions about your companies, your investments, how long you've been wealthy, whether you might be interested in helping with Dad's retirement planning or Mom's idea for starting a catering business." I wasn't surprised. Our parents had spent decades treating my achievements as footnotes to Rebecca's success story, but now that they understood the scope of my wealth, they were suddenly very interested in maintaining a close relationship with their practical daughter. "And?" I prompted. "And it's bothering me," Rebecca said firmly. "Sarah, they never showed this much interest in your career when they thought you were just an accountant living a quiet suburban life. Now that they know you're wealthy, suddenly they want to be involved in every detail of your business decisions." The fact that Rebecca had noticed this pattern, and more importantly, that it bothered her enough to call me about it, represented a significant shift in our family dynamics. "I appreciate you saying that," I said honestly. "But it's not entirely surprising. People respond differently to success than they do to perceived ordinariness." "That's not okay," Rebecca said, and I could hear genuine frustration in her voice. "You're their daughter either way. Your value as a person isn't determined by your net worth." "I agree. But I stopped expecting equal treatment years ago, remember? This is just confirmation of something I already understood about how our family operates." "Well, I don't want to operate that way," Rebecca said decisively. "And I told them so." This was unexpected. "What did you tell them?" "I told them that if they wanted to have a relationship with you, it needed to be based on who you are as a person, not what you might be able to do for them financially. I said that their sudden interest in your business success, after years of barely acknowledging your achievements, was transparent and unfair. I was quiet for a moment, genuinely moved by Rebecca's willingness to advocate for me with our parents. "How did they respond?" I asked. "About how you'd expect. Mom got defensive and said she's always been proud of your accomplishments. Dad said they were just trying to show interest in your life and understand what you've been building." "Both of which are probably partly true," I said. "Maybe, but their timing is convenient, isn't it? They want to understand your investments now that they know you're wealthy, but they never asked detailed questions about your career when they thought it was just regular accounting work." Rebecca was right, and her recognition of this double standard meant more to me than she probably realized. "There's something else," Rebecca continued. "James and I have been talking about the business situation, and we want you to know that we don't expect family considerations to influence your company's competitive strategy." Meaning? Meaning that Digital Solutions Midwest should compete as aggressively as necessary to maximize your returns on investment. James understands that business decisions need to be based on market realities, not family relationships. This was mature thinking from both of them, and it suggested that James had processed our coffee conversation constructively. "How is James handling the competitive pressure?" I asked. "Really well, actually. He's been analyzing Morrison Tech Solutions' market position and identifying ways to differentiate his services from DSM's offerings. He thinks there are opportunities to specialize in serving smaller clients who need more personalized attention than larger companies typically provide." "That's smart, strategic thinking," I said, meaning it. There's definitely room in the market for companies that excel at serving different client segments. He also wanted me to tell you that he's interested in discussing the partnership possibilities you mentioned, once DSM's restructuring is complete. "Good. I'll call him next week to set up another meeting." We talked for a few more minutes about family dynamics, business strategy, and Rebecca's wedding planning. But the most significant part of the conversation was Rebecca's willingness to recognize and address our parents' inconsistent treatment of my achievements. For the first time in our adult relationship, my sister was actively advocating for me rather than simply accepting the family's established patterns. It felt like the beginning of a friendship based on mutual respect rather than inherited roles. That evening, I decided to return my parents' calls. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the overly cheerful tone she used when she was nervous about a conversation. "Sarah, I'm so glad you called back. Your father and I have been hoping to hear from you." "I got your messages," I said simply. "You mentioned wanting to discuss my business interests." "Well, yes. We're just so amazed by everything you've accomplished, and we feel terrible that we didn't know about your success earlier. We want to understand what you've been building and how we can be more supportive going forward." The words were right, but the timing made them feel hollow. Where had this supportive interest been when I was building my first real estate portfolio? When I was making my initial private equity investments? When I was taking the calculated risks that had created my current wealth? "I appreciate that," I said diplomatically. "But I'm curious about something. When I bought my first investment property 5 years ago, you didn't ask any follow-up questions about my real estate strategy. When I mentioned working with private equity investors 3 years ago, the conversation got redirected to Rebecca's latest design project within 5 minutes. What's different now?" Silence on the other end of the line. "Sarah, we had no idea those early investments were part of something bigger," my mother said finally. "If we'd known you were building toward significant wealth." "You would have what?" I interrupted gently. "Paid more attention? Asked better questions? Shown the same interest in my career that you've always shown in Rebecca's?" "That's not fair," my mother said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's not about fairness," I replied. It's about patterns. And the pattern has been that my achievements get acknowledged politely and then forgotten, while Rebecca's achievements get celebrated and discussed extensively. We've always been proud of both of you, my mother said, but even she seemed to hear how weak that sounded. I'm sure you have been, but pride and attention are different things, and I stopped looking for attention from the family years ago, which actually made it easier to focus on building wealth without external pressure. My father's voice came through the phone, indicating that he'd been listening on an extension. Sarah, we want to be more involved in your life going forward, he said. We want to understand your business interests and support your continued success. I appreciate that, I said, but I need you to understand something important. My relationship with you can't be based on my net worth. If you want to be more involved in my life, it needs to be because you value me as a person, not because you've suddenly realized I'm wealthy. Of course, my father said quickly. Your success doesn't change how much we love you. But it apparently changes how much attention you pay to my achievements, I replied. And that's something we'll need to work through if we're going to have an authentic relationship going forward. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, covering everything from their retirement planning questions to their sudden interest in my investment strategies. I answered their questions politely, but without the detailed enthusiasm they seemed to be expecting. By the end of the call, I think we all understood that our family dynamics had shifted permanently. My parents were trying to adjust to having a wealthy daughter they'd previously underestimated. I was trying to decide whether their newfound interest was worth engaging with, given its obvious connection to my financial success. But the most important change was Rebecca's recognition of these patterns and her willingness to advocate for fair treatment. For the first time in our adult lives, my sister and I were becoming genuine allies rather than competitors for our parents' attention. It was a better foundation for family relationships than I'd had in years. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in DSM's newly renovated conference room with James, Marcus Chen, and our respective legal advisors, finalizing a partnership agreement that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. Digital solutions. Midwest's restructuring had exceeded even my optimistic projections. With proper management, adequate capital, and strategic marketing, DSM had already secured contracts with 4 new mid-market clients and was projecting revenue growth of 200% within the first year. The company that had been facing bankruptcy in September was now positioned to become a dominant player in Chicago's business software market. But rather than using that strength to crush smaller competitors like Morrison Tech Solutions, we'd identified opportunities for collaboration that would benefit both companies while serving clients more effectively than either could manage independently. The referral structure looks solid, James said, reviewing the partnership agreement our lawyers had drafted. DSM handles clients who need comprehensive software solutions for complex operations. Morrison Tech Solutions handles clients who need specialized applications with personalized service. We split referral fees 50-50 when either company brings opportunities to the other. And the joint venture provision covers larger projects that require both companies' expertise, I added. Municipal contracts, hospital systems, multi-location retail chains, projects that neither of us could handle alone, but could manage effectively as partners. Marcus nodded approvingly. It's a smart arrangement. Instead of competing for the same market share, you're expanding the total market and capturing more value through collaboration. James looked up from the contract documents. Sarah, I have to say, when I first learned about your acquisition of DSM, I was terrified that Morrison Tech Solutions was about to be put out of business by a better-funded competitor. That would have been a waste of resources, I replied. Your company has valuable client relationships and specialized expertise that would be difficult for DSM to replicate. Destroying that value through pure competition would have been economically inefficient. Plus, Marcus added with a slight smile, partnership agreements generate more sustainable returns than market domination strategies. Collaborative approaches create value for everyone involved, including the clients who benefit from complementary services. The partnership agreement we were signing represented more than just a business arrangement between DSM and Morrison Tech Solutions. It was a model for how family relationships and business interests could coexist constructively, rather than creating the kind of competitive dynamics that destroy both professional opportunities and personal connections. James signed first, then passed the documents to me. As I added my signature to the partnership agreement, I realized that this moment represented something I'd never expected. Genuine, professional respect from someone who'd initially seen me as the practical, unremarkable sister of his fiancé. To successful partnerships, James said, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. To profitable collaborations, I replied, matching his gesture. To family members who can work together without destroying each other, Marcus added, which made both James and me laugh. After the meeting, James and I walked together toward the parking garage. "Can I ask you something?" James said as we waited for the elevator. "Sure." "Do you think Rebecca understands how dramatically her family dynamics have changed in the past month?" It was a perceptive question, one that suggested James had been observing our family's adjustment period more carefully than I'd realized. "I think she's starting to," I said. "Rebecca and I had a conversation last week that felt different from any conversation we've had in years. More honest, more equal, less defined by the roles we played when we were younger." "That's good," James said. "Because I have to tell you, watching your parents' reaction to learning about your wealth has been illuminating." "In what way?" "They've called Rebecca 6 times in the past 2 weeks, asking questions about your business interests and wondering whether you might be willing to provide financial advice for their retirement planning. But in the 18 months I've been dating Rebecca, I can't remember them ever asking detailed questions about your career when they thought you were just working a regular accounting job." The elevator arrived, and we stepped inside. "It bothers Rebecca," James continued. "She's been saying that your value as their daughter shouldn't be determined by your net worth, and she's right." "Rebecca said something similar to me," I replied. "I appreciate her recognizing the double standard, even if it's too late to change the patterns that created it." "Is it too late?" James asked. "I mean, do you think your relationship with your parents can evolve into something more authentic? Or are you done trying to have their approval matter to you?" It was a thoughtful question, one I'd been considering myself. "I think I'm done needing their approval," I said, "but I'm not necessarily done having a relationship with them. If they can learn to value me for who I am, rather than what I can do for them financially, there might be possibilities for genuine connection. But that's their choice to make." The elevator reached the parking garage level, and we stepped out. "For what it's worth," James said, "I think you're handling the whole situation with remarkable grace. If my family had treated my achievements the way yours treated yours, I probably would have been a lot less diplomatic about revealing my success." "Diplomacy serves my interests better than confrontation," I replied. "I don't need to punish anyone for past mistakes. I just need to establish boundaries that protect my future relationships from those same patterns." James nodded thoughtfully. "That's probably wise. And Sarah? Thank you for structuring this partnership in a way that allows both companies to succeed. You could have used DSM's advantages to dominate the market completely. But you chose collaboration instead. That means a lot, especially given the family implications." "Business partnerships work better when both parties benefit," I said simply. Crushing your company would have been profitable in the short term, but working together will be more profitable for everyone in the long term. As we parted ways and headed to our respective cars, I reflected on how much had changed since Rebecca's engagement party 6 weeks earlier. I'd revealed wealth that I'd been building in secret for 5 years. I'd forced my family to reevaluate their assumptions about my capabilities and achievements. I'd established a business partnership with my future brother-in-law that benefited both our companies while preserving family relationships. Most importantly, I'd stopped being invisible to the people who supposedly knew me best. The question now was what to do with that visibility. For the first time in my adult life, my family saw me clearly. My achievements, my capabilities, my success. How we built relationships based on that clearer understanding would determine whether the revelations at Rebecca's engagement party had improved our family dynamics or simply replaced one set of problems with another. But that was a challenge for tomorrow. Today, I was simply satisfied that I'd finally stopped hiding who I really was. 6 months after Rebecca's engagement party, I was sitting in my penthouse living room reviewing quarterly reports from my business portfolio when Rebecca called to discuss wedding plans. But the conversation that followed was unlike any discussion we'd had about her upcoming marriage. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me," Rebecca said without preamble. "Okay," I replied, setting aside the financial documents I'd been analyzing. "Do you think James and I are making a mistake getting married?" The question caught me completely off guard. Rebecca had been blissfully happy about her engagement for months, planning every detail of their wedding with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found their perfect partner. "What makes you ask that?" I said carefully. "Because watching how our family's dynamics changed when they learned about your wealth has made me question whether I really understand how relationships work when money becomes a factor." I was quiet for a moment, trying to understand what Rebecca was really asking. "Can you be more specific?" I said. "James has been incredibly successful with the business partnership you two established," Rebecca continued. "Morrison Tech Solutions revenue has increased by 60% since you signed the collaboration agreement, and he's been able to hire 3 new employees. He's happier and more confident than I've ever seen him." "That's wonderful," I said, meaning it. "James is smart and hardworking. He deserved the opportunity to grow his business." "But here's what's bothering me," Rebecca said. "I can't tell if he's happier because his business is succeeding or because he's no longer worried about competing with his future sister-in-law's company. And I can't tell if our parents' sudden interest in having family dinners every week is because they want to spend time with us or because they want to maintain access to you and your financial expertise." These were perceptive observations, and they suggested that Rebecca had been thinking more deeply about family dynamics and relationship motivations than I'd given her credit for. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think people's behavior changes when money becomes part of the equation," Rebecca said. "And I'm worried that everyone in our family, including James, is treating both of us differently now that they know you're wealthy." "Are you concerned that James is marrying you to maintain a connection to my business interests?" I asked directly. "Not exactly. James fell in love with me long before he knew about your wealth, and I don't think he's calculating enough to marry someone for business reasons. But I do think the partnership with DSM has changed how he sees our relationship and maybe how he sees himself." This was a sophisticated analysis of a complex situation, and it showed a level of emotional intelligence that impressed me. "How has it changed things?" I asked. "He talks about our future differently now," Rebecca said. 6 months ago, our conversations about marriage were focused on building a life together, starting a family, creating a home. Now our conversations include discussions about business opportunities, investment strategies, long-term wealth building. It's not necessarily bad, but it's different. Different how? More ambitious, I guess. More focused on financial success and less focused on personal happiness. And I'm not sure whether that change is because James is naturally ambitious and my wealth revelation gave him permission to express that ambition, or because being connected to your business success has made him think differently about what's possible. I was beginning to understand Rebecca's concerns, and they were more nuanced than I'd initially realized. "What would you want me to do about this?" I asked. "I don't know," Rebecca said honestly. "I'm not asking you to change anything about your business relationships or your family interactions. I'm just trying to understand whether the person James has become since learning about your wealth is who he really is, or whether he's adapting to what he thinks our family expects from him now." It was a fair question, and one that probably didn't have a simple answer. "Can I share an observation?" I said. "Please." James's behavior in our business partnership has been consistently professional, strategic, and focused on creating value for both companies. He's never tried to leverage his relationship with you to gain advantages in our business dealings, and he's never suggested that family connections should influence our competitive strategy. "That's true," Rebecca acknowledged. "His approach to the partnership has been exactly what I'd want from any business collaborator: competent, honest, mutually beneficial. If he were trying to exploit family connections for business gain, I would have seen evidence of that approach by now." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, processing this perspective. "So you think his motivations are legitimate?" she asked. "I think his business motivations are legitimate," I said carefully. "Whether his personal motivations have been influenced by learning about my wealth is something only James can answer honestly." "How do I find out?" "By having a direct conversation with him about your concerns," I said. "Rebecca, if you're questioning whether James's feelings for you have been affected by your family's financial situation, that's a conversation you need to have before you get married, not after." "I know," she said quietly. "I just don't know how to bring it up without sounding like I'm accusing him of being a gold digger." "You're not accusing him of anything," I replied. "You're asking legitimate questions about how external factors might be influencing your relationship. That's exactly the kind of conversation mature couples have before making permanent commitments to each other." We talked for another 20 minutes about relationship dynamics, family pressures, and the ways that money changes how people interact with each other. By the end of the conversation, Rebecca seemed more confident about addressing her concerns directly with James rather than worrying about them privately. But her questions had raised issues that I'd been considering myself. How much had my family's relationships with each other changed as a result of learning about my wealth? Were we developing more authentic connections based on mutual respect? Or were we simply adapting to new power dynamics that weren't necessarily healthier than the old ones? My parents had indeed become more attentive to my opinions and more interested in my business activities. But their increased attention felt motivated by what I could offer them rather than by genuine curiosity about who I was as a person. James had approached our business partnership with professionalism and integrity, but I'd noticed that his conversations with me had become more deferential, more focused on seeking my advice about business strategy and investment opportunities. Even Rebecca, who'd been more honest and direct with me than ever before, sometimes seemed uncertain about how to balance her new understanding of my capabilities with her lifetime of being the family's golden child. The wealth I'd built had given me financial freedom and professional respect that I'd never had before. But it had also complicated every relationship in my life by introducing questions about motivations, expectations, and power dynamics that hadn't existed when people thought I was just the practical sister living a quiet, suburban life. Learning to navigate those complications was proving to be more challenging than building wealth had been. As I write this, a full year has passed since that October evening when my sister announced my divorce at her engagement party, and I responded by revealing that I'd spent 5 years building a business empire in secret. The woman who walked into that country club dining room as the recently divorced accountant who might need help finding an apartment walked out as someone her family was seeing clearly for the first time in decades. The changes that followed were both more dramatic and more subtle than I'd expected. On the surface, everything shifted almost immediately. My parents began treating my opinions with the same respect they'd always reserved for Rebecca's creative insights. My extended family started asking for business advice and investment recommendations. James approached me as a professional peer rather than as his fiancé's practical sister. Rebecca herself began relating to me as an equal rather than as the responsible sidekick to her more glamorous life. But the deeper transformation has been internal, and it's taken months to fully understand what changed when I stopped hiding my success from the people who supposedly knew me best. For 5 years, I'd been building wealth while living a double life. To my family, I was Sarah the accountant, stable, practical, quietly married to David, content with modest achievements and predictable routines. To my business partners and investment colleagues, I was Sarah the private equity investor, strategic, ambitious, capable of analyzing complex deals and taking calculated risks that generated significant returns. The exhaustion of maintaining those separate identities had been greater than I'd realized until I finally dropped the pretense. When I revealed my business portfolio at Rebecca's engagement party, I wasn't just sharing financial information. I was finally allowing my family to see the complete version of who I'd become. The relief was immediate and profound. No more carefully edited conversations about my career. No more deflecting questions about my investment activities. No more pretending that David and I were struggling with ordinary financial concerns while I was actually worried about portfolio diversification and market volatility. But integration also brought new challenges that I hadn't anticipated. When people know you're wealthy, every interaction carries the potential for financial implications. Family members who'd never asked for money before suddenly had business ideas that needed funding. Friends who'd split restaurant bills equally for years became uncomfortable when I suggested more expensive venues. Even casual conversations about travel plans or home improvements took on different meanings when people knew I could afford luxury options without strain. Learning to establish boundaries around my wealth while maintaining authentic relationships has been an ongoing process. I've had to become comfortable with saying no to investment requests from family members whose business ideas weren't viable. I've had to find ways to be generous without creating dependencies that would corrupt our relationships. I've had to learn the difference between people who value me for who I am and people who are primarily interested in what I can do for them. The business partnership with James has exceeded all expectations, both professionally and personally. Digital Solutions Midwest and Morrison Tech Solutions have collaborated on several major projects that neither company could have handled independently, and our combined market share has grown significantly. More importantly, James has proven that his motivations were genuinely professional rather than opportunistic. Our business relationship has remained completely separate from family dynamics, and he's never tried to leverage his connection to Rebecca for competitive advantages. Rebecca's concerns about whether her relationship with James had been affected by learning about my wealth were ultimately unfounded, but I respect her for asking those questions directly rather than wondering about them privately. Their marriage is clearly based on genuine affection and shared values rather than financial considerations. But I also understand why the revelation of my wealth made her question relationship dynamics that had previously seemed straightforward. My parents' adjustment has been more complicated. Their increased attention to my opinions and achievements is gratifying in some ways, but it's also obviously connected to their new understanding of my financial capabilities. We've developed a more functional relationship than we had before, but I'm not sure it's more authentic. They're more interested in my perspective on investment strategies than they are in understanding how building wealth changed my personality or priorities. The most meaningful change has been with Rebecca herself. For the first time in our adult lives, we relate to each other as equals rather than as the creative sister and the practical sister. Our conversations are more honest, more complex, more genuinely supportive than they've ever been. Rebecca has acknowledged the ways our family's different treatment of our achievements affected both of us, and she's been actively working to create more balanced dynamics going forward. Building wealth taught me that I'm capable of much more than I'd previously imagined. More risk tolerance, more strategic thinking, more confidence in my ability to identify opportunities and execute complex plans. But revealing that wealth taught me something equally important. Authentic relationships require people to see you clearly, and being seen clearly requires the courage to show people who you really are. For 5 years, I'd protected myself from my family's underestimation by keeping my success invisible. That strategy allowed me to build wealth without external interference, but it also prevented me from having genuine connections with people who supposedly knew me best. When I finally revealed what I'd been building, I lost the safety of invisibility but gained the possibility of relationships based on mutual respect rather than inherited assumptions. The woman I've become through this process is more confident, more direct, more willing to establish boundaries that protect my interests and relationships. I no longer need external validation to feel successful, but I'm also no longer willing to accept relationships that require me to minimize my achievements or hide my capabilities. My penthouse apartment overlooks Lake Michigan, and I often spend evening hours watching the water change colors as the sun sets over the city. The view reminds me that perspectives shift depending on where you're positioned, and that height provides clarity that's impossible to achieve from ground level. Building wealth elevated my perspective on what's possible when you're willing to take calculated risks and think strategically about long-term outcomes. Revealing that wealth elevated my understanding of how relationships change when people finally see you clearly. Both elevations were necessary for creating the life I actually wanted, rather than the life I thought I was supposed to want. The practical accountant who is satisfied with modest goals and predictable outcomes is still part of who I am. But she's no longer the only part, and she's no longer the part that drives my decisions about career opportunities or relationship boundaries. I've integrated the ambitious risk-taker with the careful analyst, the strategic investor with the loyal family member, the confident business owner with the supportive sister. That integration required me to stop hiding parts of myself from people whose approval I'd been seeking for decades. It required me to accept that some people would never see my achievements as valuable, and to build wealth and relationships that didn't depend on their recognition. Most importantly, it required me to trust that authentic success, financial, professional, and personal, is worth more than the safety of other people's comfortable assumptions about who you are and what you're capable of achieving. If you've made it this far, thank you for letting me share this story with you. The night my sister announced my divorce, and I announced my business empire changed everything about how my family sees me. But more importantly, it changed everything about how I see myself. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever built something significant while the people closest to you were paying attention to someone else's achievements? What would you have done in my situation? Would you have kept your success private, or would you have found the courage to show people who you really were? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about family dynamics, hidden success, and the moment when everything changes. Remember, Your worth isn't determined by other people's recognition of your achievements. Sometimes the most successful thing you can do is stop waiting for validation and start building the life you actually want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.